So that's where we're going to leave the intro here. And what we're going to have right now is a little bit of a Q&A panel discussion. So if you've already been entering questions in, that's great. And if not, we will make up some things to talk about, Jeremy, before we get into the next thing.
Yeah, you know, the coffee's still kicking in for folks, so we don't have a ton of questions, but I would encourage you to enter those. Really kind of anything through this planning process so far would be worth discussing, but maybe Joe and I can fill the time here with a little bit of discussion about, I want to kind of go back to that SEM model you have, if you could just go back a couple slides. Yeah, something like this. You know, again, I found this incredibly useful with our discussion of planning and uplift, and you know, what's a problem, right? We call them resource concerns within NRCS, and so this model is really useful for talking with our colleagues and our landowners about where are you now and where could you be. And then there's this area component that Joe was talking about, you know, how big is, you know, how much area is in each stage versus where could it be. So that I have found to be a very useful tool so far in just getting this concept across. And remember yesterday I mentioned some of the tools we have built around viewing streams as just a channel with a little bit of fringe vegetation. Those don't work so well in this, right? So I don't know, Joe, this has been a work in progress, but I do see this becoming more clear over the last few years as we've done these workshops.
Yeah, I think, and kind of turning these into these, that spatial sort of mapping exercise, I think is important. And that when we talk about condition, and trying to make this assessment of conditions, that is less subjective, right? That is like, no, the conditions are what they are, and given the indicators that we're using, they can just be arrived at. However, recovery potential is a mix of the science, so to speak, and what the management and societal values are. And I think that's an important concept to convey.
Right. Well, we are getting some questions coming in here. And so someone asks, have you found these kinds of graphics and percentages of what's possible being useful in helping a landowner move from where they initially were thinking about this to maybe going a little bit further?
Yeah, I think so. Without the mapping and without the graphics, conversations turn into all or nothing. We see this with beaver too, and so what I find really helpful with the maps is for most people, and I think a lot of landowners that are spending a lot of time on their land, managing it and know it intimately, etc. You know, map is just a really intuitive instrument to them anyway. And so when you reframe the discussion and the conversation, not around, hey, can I have beaver in a stage 0 mess across your whole property, versus, well, what about over here? And then also really engaging on, well, what is it you're trying to do with the land? How is it you're using that? Are you using it to harvest, you know, for example, you're growing hay and you're harvesting it, you know, you got equipment, you got to run across that. That's a very different situation than you're just using it as pasture. And so, yeah, long-winded way of saying yes, I think that the maps are helpful in terms of transparently expressing what you're thinking as a planner or designer, and then building together the expectation management and a shared vision about what you want to achieve.
So how precise do you really have to be here? I mean, are we talking about doing topographic surveys and hydrologic modeling to come up with maps like this, or when would that be appropriate if we aren't doing that now?
Yeah, how precise? Horses for courses. My mantra is get away with as sloppy and good enough, but accurate as you can. So that is, in this case, I think the level of mapping that I'm sloppily doing, having never been to the site here, I've never been to this place. I'm just zooming in off a map. I think that this is adequate for most of these exercises. I think that the uncertainty, let's say in this example, it's plus or minus 10 to 20 feet in where I'm putting that, the lines should be that blurry. We shouldn't be over promising. When we get into a situation where I need to promise, in plan form, plus or minus, a foot to 5 feet, or in vertical, that it's really that sensitive, we're getting into too tricky of a situation. That's where you can break out the checkbook and spend a bunch of money on a topographic survey and or start looking at hydraulic models, and you might be inching into places that are really more appropriate for engineering practice. So I think in most of these situations, you map out where the constraints are. If you can stay away from those and or protect those while still getting some recovery back, you can get away with some rather imprecise stuff, but still reasonably accurate. And I think that's a space that we want to aim for, so that we don't get stuck just doing little tiny postage stamp projects.
Right, and I think that'll be a topic of discussion later in this session, right, is kind of some minimum expectations for design. And
Yes.
we're not really including detailed topo surveys in that, but it's only because we're trying to steer away from that infrastructure risk right out of the gate. And so,
right.
There may be instances where we want to be concerned about, are we backing water up onto the adjacent neighbor's property, right? That's something NRCS is always worried about, is what are the downstream effects, what are the upstream effects? And so those are edges where we're going to want to be real careful. But in between, if we have that space to work, some of this becomes less important, and there's real world consequences to not having to do those types of surveys and modeling, because we are limited on capacity of specialists that have those skills and all the equipment to do it and whatnot. So we have a ton of questions coming in. Thank you all for waking up. And Joe, so I'm going to move on to this Coburn Creek example. There were a couple related to, how do you know when you need to do the next treatment, and what are the indicators of that? How long do you think it would take to actually reach some of these proportions you're talking about?
That's a great question. Scott is going to pick up on this as well, Weber, better. But what we could, let me just go see if I can get, use this one as an example. Let's see how to explain this. Let's say that our goal here was to get out of just this laterally active single thread channel and get more into anastomosing, right? Well, we think it's a little bit structurally starved. We shove some structure in, and what does the structure do? Maybe it starts kicking off some new diffluences, just a fancy way of saying places where the channel is going to flow, right? And get some islands in between. So we start doing that, and maybe we come across, I'm not sure how well let me see if I can try this. Maybe we come across and we can pop out here, maybe we can pop out there. I think there are some little pen tools I might be able to use. So maybe we start getting this, we start getting something like that, something like this, right? And so we're getting some of our goals, right? But we're not getting all the way out to our recovery potential. You've put the structures in, wow, okay, it blasted some banks, it split some stuff, it spread some flow out, but now it kind of needs another hit. And so then you hit it again so that you can start working out, again. And then, it's, when do you stop? Well, you stop when you're getting to your recovery potential. You stop when the natural processes of either beaver dam activity or wood accumulation are carrying that trajectory towards helping you realize that recovery potential. And once you realize the recovery potential, it doesn't mean you're going to sustain it forever. And that doesn't mean that it's not self-sustaining. It could come and go with, maybe there's maybe there's an event that produces a lot of wood delivery, or maybe there's a period where beaver are really active for 5 years and then they kind of let an area rest. And so it may breathe in and out of that recovery potential space, but when it's doing so on its own accord, that's when you're done. As far as the timing is why we have adaptive management. You can make some guesses about it based off of, flow frequency statistics and kind of what's going on and watching, and you can get a little better about that. But you're going to want to, like Weber illustrated yesterday, give yourself quite a bit of wiggle room on that, so you don't lock yourself in and say, yeah, this is going to happen next year. I mean, you may get a drought for 5 years. Does that address that at all?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Moving on to a couple of folks have asked, what do we mean by uplift? Can you define that? What is that referring to?
Yeah, so uplift we can just think of as generic. It's in terms of a term. And so this is where Weber's talk yesterday on indicators really comes in. So uplift of what? From what, right? And so in this case, literally for the measure of the indicator of proportion of the valley bottom that's active, which is just the active channel plus active floodplain, right? So that's 41 acres. It's 50%. And so the uplift here is from that 41 acres potentially to 61. So that's where the 22 comes from. And that's, if you divide that 63 by the 41, that's a 53% uplift. So the uplift is not it's not necessarily specific to any indicator. You could use that just as well for if I can get back to it. You can use that for inundation, right? And your uplift would be from the proportion of the valley bottom inundated, say in this case 5%, and you think you might be able to get it up to 10 or 15 or whatever. So that's what we mean by uplift.
I'm going to give you my take on this. If you let me share my screen, give me control real quick.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Can you see this diagram?
Yep.
This is what uplift means to me. This is the figure that Colin Thorne showed in Module 1 out of their paper, the Stream Evolution Model paper. And remember these pie charts? These represent those ecosystem services and values that we care about. And the relative proportions, the size of the pie chart is what you might expect from each of these different stages. And so when I think about uplift, I think about ecosystem service uplift and how are we justifying what we're doing. And that could be different for every landowner, every funding agency or whatever, what their preference is. But overall, we could talk about, hey, if we're in the stage 7 and we have this much area of that, and we can go to stage 8 and we get this much area of that, you can scale up those expected benefits. And in your local watershed, those could be a variety of different things that matter to people, like water quality or fish or wildlife or forage or something like that. But that's what I think about.
Bigger pie.
Bigger pie chart, yep. And who doesn't like more pie? All right, you take back the screen, Joe.
Yeah, I mean it's fine. We can leave it on this for now.
Okay.
But yeah, so and just for people's just kind of expectation management, we are going to go for another 4 minutes till about 10:45, trying to address your questions. Then we'll give you a 15-minute break. We are anticipating that all of us have a little bit of Zoom or meeting fatigue staring at your screen, so we're trying to have the discussion sessions be a little longer today, and also the break generous here in terms of coming up pretty quickly. So we'll go 10:45 to 11, and then we'll have Scott. So keep going, Jeremy, with whatever's coming in.
Yeah, well, a couple of folks asked here about more of the social side of this, again, of how do you talk to landowners about this who might not initially want to reactivate that whole valley bottom, but are there any tips, anything that you've seen as successful, whether that's with traditional agricultural producers or even some of the non-traditional NGO and easement properties I know you've worked on, just partners in general, getting them to envision what could be out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two words: patience and pilots. I think that, even if you come in and you got a real strong vision about what's possible there, we don't need to jam that down people's throats. We don't need to get there right away. It could be baby steps. Just for the sake of contrast, I made up this stupid story of Pops and Carol, right? So maybe there isn't a Carol. Well, we can work with Pops, and let's just keep it more modest. Let's keep it where he wants it to be. And let's do a pilot. Let's do an initial phase where he gets more comfortable with what isn't how he's been thinking about that system for a long time, right? And so it's being patient for everybody that you're dealing with. We're talking about a lot of different concepts. These are different ways of looking at rivers than people are accustomed to. And it can be really frustrating when, you get it, you see it, it, and you just want everybody else to see it. But we've just got to, and this is coming from me, a rather impatient person. We do have to just be patient and work at a pace. We can still push, but work at a pace. And what I've seen is then people, once they start getting a little bit of comfort and familiarity with it and realizing that it's not precisely predictable, but it is really predictable in terms of, what is going to happen, but they need to see those first sort of baby steps first to get confidence in it. Does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect, Joe. And I think just for the sake of keeping us on track, we'll keep moving on to the next presentation, but there's a number of questions queued up for you when you have time to respond to individuals. Thank you.